Etu Fuitahi Poteseo. Poteseo. I almost had it right. Was born in Tonga, in Tofa, Tonga, to the late Helia Fatesui. Can you say it for me? Thank you. Of Talafo. Oh, I got that one right. And Ana Ata of Nuku. He is the fifth of 7 children and was raised in Kali, Hawaii, and in Kearns, Utah. Currently attends the University of Utah and will graduate in May with a Bachelor of Science in Communication and Pre-Med. He is a health program outreach coordinator for the Queer Center. Sorry, I apologize. For the Queen Center, a Tonga translator for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and also enjoys giving his time to organizations like the Utah Pacific Islander Civic Engagement Coalition and the Utah Pacific Islander Health Coalition, where he advocates for the Pacific Islander communities. He's a strong advocate and activist for social justice, health reform, and preservation of indigenous cultures. Please join me in welcome.
I want to express my gratitude to Miriam and Pandos for this opportunity. I feel inadequate being with these panelist members, but I'm grateful to be here and to, I also did not email what I was going to speak about, but I want to highly discuss about cultural appropriation and appreciation, the differences, specifically among the Pacific Islander community, and sharing my experiences as a first-generation Tongan American. Well, specifically in the Tongan culture, culture is sacred, it's tapu. And it's also the preservation of social spaces, environmental spaces, and there is beauty and meaning behind the culture. And we often, and the work that I do and that I advocate for in the Utah Pacific Islander Civic Engagement, we help encourage the Pacific Islander community and those that want to learn about the culture and the meaning behind it. We often see in media and with consumerism and capitalism, especially within the Hawaiian culture, with how it's been used in the tourism industry, and how it's been highly abused and disrespected, and no meaning behind it. We recently worked with the Oceanic Trust, those were the developers of the recent Disney movie Moana, and so Disney has been culturally aware somehow, but they've reached out to anthropologists and those within the Pacific Islander community to receive some knowledge on how they can portray their movie Moana. But there was still some misunderstanding with certain deities, like certain characters that was used, like Maui and others that have disrespected indigenous cultures. And the group that I'm involved with, the Utah Pacific Islander Civic Engagement, we were able to do a petition to have corporations like Disney to be more culturally sensitive and aware, not to be trivial or to make it humorous, but to also an opportunity for corporations like Disney to educate and to provide the meaning behind the stories of these cultures. And so, being heavily involved with this nonprofit organizations that we've been able to help educate, and it's great as people are more. There's over 40,000 Native Hawaiian Islanders here in Utah, and 13 million within the United States. So we have a population, we have a voice, and we often see our culture being appropriated and not portrayed as how it's passed down, the sacredness. We are a storytelling people. These rituals, these tribal designs, these things have a meaning behind them. And my effort and my work that I do with the Pacific Islanders is to help educate, and to help people gain an understanding and appreciation and respect for the culture that I have grown to know and been passed down through generations. And so, and today that's why I want to further raise that awareness of those that are wanting to learn more about the Pacific Island cultures and being aware of the things that are portrayed on the media, and that we can able to work together and to provide that proper education.
Thank you. James Hernandez.
Can I stand up now? Can I sit down, stand here? Can y'all still hear me? Wait, you gotta be. I know. I'm just gonna stand here. My legs are asleep.
All right. James Hernandez is a member of the, how do you say the band? How do you say? Tehuan Band of Mission Indians in San Antonio, Texas. He earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Our Lady of the Lake University with an emphasis on research and counseling, and is currently working on a master's degree in education at the University of Utah. His research interests include deconstructing colonial views of gender and sexuality, as well as applying decolonizing methodologies to K-12 curriculum and policy. He is currently a Title outreach worker in the Granite School District in Salt Lake City, where he tutors tribally enrolled elementary students. His volunteer interests include being a youth ambassador for an online resource called We, capital R, Native, We Are Native, which is committed to empowering Native youth through counter storytelling and health promotion. James is also involved in CASA, court-appointed special advocates, and when finished with his training, will advocate for kids in the Utah foster care system. James has led and participated in many presentations and discussions on issues of inequity and inequality in schools and society in general. He has presented on topics such as microaggressions in the classroom, surveillance of students in schools, and ways of surveillance in schools. James currently serves as education chair for PANDOS, in which he is an active member since March 2017. Please join me in welcoming James Hernandez.
Now, I normally don't like to read off what I wrote, but it's late in the day for me, and I've been on campus since noon studying, so I tend to ramble, kind of like what I'm doing right now, so I'm going to stick with what I wrote down when I was in a better mindset. Then when we ask questions, and I'll speak freely, that'll be easier. So this was from an interview I did with City Weekly in preparing for this. So they gave me a few questions, and I hope I don't like bulldoze everyone else's questions, but these were some responses that I thought were helpful. So the first one, what is cultural appropriation, and can you give me some examples of it? Cultural appropriation is when someone learns something, such as a skill, technique, or style, and uses it for profit in a way that is demeaning to the original practice. Appropriation also serves to limit people in a specific time period, or promote stereotypes that serve to degrade the culture being emulated. A few examples, of course, is a headdress. Why is that important? Because it's typically a high honor. Actually, not typically. It's always a high honor for someone to have that. What helps me think about it is something in the military, a military uniform, our military medals that are earned. And we have, in the U.S. society, U.S. culture, we hold our military very highly. We can see that by the budget, by the U.S. budget. We hold that very highly, so for some reason, if you say anything anti-military, you must be anti-American. So it's very similar to that. It's like Well, someone who goes through training, someone who learns all these skills and everything, they're veteran, and then they come back and then they see someone, that bought it at a costume, speaking of costume, they bought it at a costume store, that wouldn't be appropriate. So that's the kind of things that, for me, it makes it, okay, that's serious. It's serious, because you wouldn't want to see anybody doing that or wearing that. I'm going to go to the next one because I have a list of examples, but we can get into that. So what are the repercussions of cultural appropriation? So specifically, since I work with youth, I'm practically a youth. I like to think of myself at least close to youth. I'm getting away from it every year. But so when younger people see their culture as being made fun of or devalued, they eventually internalize the negative image and will refuse to want to associate with that part of their identity. The appropriation does the most damage to the psyche, especially when the images or practices being done are from people who belong to cultures that have a history of historical trauma. So that's also important, is tied to appropriation. It's easy to say, well, that's not valuable to you, but it is when it may not be valuable, but it could also be triggering when people appropriate cultures or appropriate practices that are from cultures that are historically traumatized. That's where it's a big issue, and a lot of people don't see that. It's not just, well, one is profit, one is capitalism, the other is trauma, is psychological. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. So what does it feel like? So this was a question directed towards me. What does it feel like to be part of a culture, from another culture, and to see it being used in this sort of way, in an appropriated way? So this is my response. When someone who has no prior experience with a group of people and their first exposure to the group is an appropriated identity, that initial experience becomes a landmark to which they base their following experiences on afterwards. For example, people may not recognize an American Indian person if they are not wearing feathers or have their face painted because of the appropriation of regalia in Halloween stores, or not take seriously smudging from an elder because it is being done for free, and the need to justify their mistake of paying lots of money for the very same thing. So what I was trying to get at is, we have this image of what an American Indian person is, or what a Native American or Indigenous person is. And when we see that appropriated image, that's the landmark. So when we see someone who is not in regalia or not in painted, I'm not familiar with too many practices with face painting, but that's their landmark. They're like, well, you're not Native American because this is how I learned it at first. So that's another issue of representation. We're being represented by something that is not accurate all the time. And the other one was smudging, and I went with this part. Smudging is with smoke and with herbs. You do it, and how I learned it was we smudge during a prayer, and they're supposed to go up, and our ancestors are supposed to hear it. That's at least how I learned it. It could be different in different practices. But some people charge for that. I've heard of people charging for it, but that's not really something you would charge for. It's appropriate to give a gift when that happens, but not necessarily monetary. At least that's how I learned it, or it's usually food or something like that. And yeah, I'll end with that, so that way we can continue with the conversation. Thank you.
Yolanda Francisco Nez. Yolanda Francisco Nez is Tabaha?
That's okay. You're fine.
Okay. And born for Nakai Dene. She was born and raised in Fort Defiance, Arizona. Vivian Yazaa is her mother. Yolanda is the granddaughter of Vincent Yazaa, and who was a Navajo code talker during World War II. Yolanda Francisco Nez is from the Navajo Dene tribe and is the director of the Salt Lake City Mayor Biskupski's Office of Diversity and Human Rights. Her work embraces and supports the mission of the office, which is to elevate the protection of basic human rights for all Salt Lake residents through policy, education, advocacy, and celebration. Her leadership was instrumental in the passage of local legislation to allow legal protections in housing and employment for the LGBTQIA+ community, monumental legislation that was duplicated in several municipalities throughout the state and eventually led to state law. Yolanda has led out on education for Salt Lake City's immigrant and refugee communities regarding employee rights in the workplace. Yolanda developed award-winning programming through the Human Rights Education Project, which addresses barriers faced during integration of refugee and immigrant populations. She has also been a key force in the formation of a committee focused on issues for equality for women in Salt Lake. The committee released, quote, "The Status of Women in Salt Lake City Report," unquote. Yolanda is a strong advocate of the Navajo people, especially for women and children, and uses her expertise to develop and inform policy. She is the chair emeritus after serving 4 years on the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault Board of Directors. She is a board member of the International Association of Official Human Rights Agencies, the United States Commission on Civil Rights Utah Advisory Committee, and Restoring Ancestral Winds. Yolanda holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Management and a Master's degree in Business Administration. Please join me in welcoming Yolanda.
Thank you so much, Razir, for inviting me today, as well as Miriam and Pandos, which is a great organization doing a lot of wonderful work in terms of advocacy on especially Native American issues, environmental issues. Tonight, I'm really glad to come to a space where has many memories for me, particularly sitting on this stage. This is a place where I grew up. I thought once I left the reservation, this was my reservation. That this little space here, especially in the College of Social Work, where both of my parents received their master's degree, I thought that this was Salt Lake City. And I didn't realize that there was a whole other world outside of the boundaries of this university. So I'm really glad to be here tonight, particularly to talk to you, and hopefully we can, I wish we had a lot more time than the time we have tonight to have some really much deeper conversation. And tonight I'm hoping to have us take a look and consider really examining how the fashion industry has appropriated Native American culture. And the many different aspects of Indian cultures have been used as marketing tools, particularly more and more recent. There are many ways that these representations contribute and facilitate the negative stereotypes that Native people have lived with for centuries. Rather than looking and focusing on the individual and the Native American identity, the true identity, just like the true history of this country called America. Representational stereotypes created at the turn of the 20th century provided fashion merchandisers and sellers with a homegrown marketing scheme, while the development of an American fashion industry based on mass-produced, ready-to-wear sportswear led to a nationwide dissemination and use of Indian colors, patterns, and designs. We are currently living under a culture and really a fashion industry and a marketing campaign that continues to perpetuate those stereotypes that we face. So it was just not too long ago, back in February of 2012, that the Navajo Nation sued Urban Outfitters Incorporated over the company's line of Navajo-branded clothing and accessories You may recall that this received a lot of attention, a lot of media attention in particular, from the nation itself. The Navajo Nation maintained that the items that were named Navajo had the Navajo name not only violated copyright laws, but also impacted the popular opinion of the Navajo and their products. So Urban Outfitters first released Navajo merchandise in 2009, including the Navajo Nation's crew pullover, the Obey Navajo shirt, Obey, O-B-E-Y, Navajo shirt, and the Navajo print fabric wrapped flask. You all know what a flask is, right? Despite the lawsuit, the company spokesperson, Ed Loram, stated that the Urban Outfitters had no plans to alter its products. He quotes that, like many other fashion brands, we interpret trends, he said. The Native American inspired trend, and specifically the term Navajo, have been cycling through fashion and fine art and design for the last few years, quote. However, clothing manufacturers use the word Navajo and more broadly the word Indian as marketing tools throughout the 20th century. Style and designs labeled as Indian came seen as part of an American sartorial identity rather than Native American, again, perpetuating the stereotypes in the process. So my hope is that today's events would cause us to examine the ways that the American fashion industry and fashion publications appropriated aspects of Indian cultures as marketing tools, specifically between especially 1940 and 1968, and the ways that representation stereotypes created through fashion outlets denoted American and individual rather than Native identity. So representational stereotypes created at the turn of the 20th century provided fashion merchandisers and sellers with a homegrown marketing scheme, while the development of an American fashion industry based on mass-produced, ready-to-wear sportswear led to a nationwide dissemination and use of Indian colors, patterns, and designs. However, the women who brought Indian attire were not necessarily attempting to engage in Indian play or don costumes. Indian styles during the mid-20th century became a way of signifying first Americanness and second uniqueness and individuality. Thus, this time period lays the groundwork for the popularity and the availability of Native clothing, considered a cycled trend and mass-produced commodity. My part focuses solely tonight on women's clothing. While men's clothing was not static, it changed at a slower rate than women's, making it less subject to trends. Subsequently, the vast majority of advertising was directed at women rather than men. Today, I examine this phenomenon through the lens of middle and upper class fashion magazines, primarily Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, but also Mademoiselle and 17, style sections of national newspapers and mail order catalogs. These sources allowed me to elucidate how fashion industry understood and interpreted Indian. Although they do not provide direct insight into how consumers use clothing, the pervasiveness of Indian marketing schemes throughout these 3 decades indicate that the ideas associated with Indian attire resonates with customers or consumers. While this might seem harmless, the ways these ideas came to be associated with specific designs and styles subsequently impact the way Anglo-Americans consider Native peoples and culture. Myth of American identity centered on Indianness have developed into a variety of representations of stereotypes. Historian and Native American scholar Nancy Perezzo defines representational stereotypes as rigid clusters of overly simplified social/cultural characteristics conjoined into a single imagined identity or schematic theory used to label a social group. Definitions that are then overgeneralized to make sense of the cultural or social differentiation from self. Stereotypes reflect social desires, fears, and imaginings that become more real than fact. While the study of clothing is often dismissed as superficial and frivolous, the symbolism behind these representational stereotypes provided justification for the actions against the stereotype group, including colonizing situations, group conflicts, business dealings, or even justifications for the status quo. Anthropologist Tressa Berman notes that although Native Americans have successfully used the legal system to reverse appropriation of their land and natural resources, the cultural appropriation of objects and ideas are more difficult to identify than guard against. The representations created and perpetuated by the American clothing industry or fashion market are thus part of a larger tradition that takes advantage of a cultural group to sell products, and in the process of creating cultural misunderstandings and misrepresentation. Neither of these issues have disappeared. Contemporary clothing companies around the world still utilize the same industry based on mass-produced, ready-to-wear sportswear. Sorry, I'm losing my spot. Nor have these issues disappeared. Contemporary clothing companies around the world still utilize many of these same marketing techniques, demonstrating the necessity of understanding why these practices can be detrimental to real Native people. The development of an American fashion industry and widespread dissemination of advertising and stereotypes is directly connected to the development of America as a consumer society. Consuming has been central to the American shared experience. Demographic, economic, and institutional growth in conjunction with technological, intellectual, and material changes prompted the transition to a modern consumer society in the half-century following 1880. Consumption became a lived ideology, a common sense that shaped the way social and cultural differences were understood and constructed around a market economy. The consumer culture that developed in the first decades of the 20th century made consumption rather than production the fundamental motif of economic action. During the late 20th and early 20th centuries, consumption was coded as feminine, making masculine consumption hidden in plain sight. In reality, men consumed as much, if not more, than women, but marketing for clothing and fashion, long determined to be feminine spheres, tended to be directed at women. Increased consumer demands coincided with changes of modes of production. Prior to 1820, most manufacturing served local markets. However, by 1860, the rapidly growing population produced a growing demand for finished goods and apparel, items that could be made quickly and cheaply in factories. In the latter half of the 19th century, the advent of the department stores and mail-order catalogs provided new outlets for textile goods, while the sewing machine made mass manufacturing possible. The consumption of clothing rose dramatically in the advent of a mass-produced clothing available in standardized sizes. Fashion and clothing are forms of multi-directional cultural production. A visual and material system of symbols and meanings that extend to all things produced by peoples. Through fashion and clothing, social change can be contemplated, proposed, initiated, denied, while the study of clothing allows the observation of the expressive aspect of a material culture. Clothing functions as a historic operator that reflects changing circumstances as well as a device that creates and constitutes change in cultural terms. Fashion and clothing can express both cultural and individual identities, making them a useful lens for examining issues such as gender, race, class, and ethnicity. More recent studies have gone beyond the analysis of garments to look at the business of fashion and its participants. Fashion industries sit at the intersection of commerce, consumers, and culture, a process that involves constant negotiation. As a society, we need to look critically at how this last category exists by examining the relationship between the business of American fashion and the issue of cultural appropriation. Is that my 10 minutes? So you've got to stop me. Okay. So I want to just mention, it's incredibly ironic to me that living in an American society, we continue to perpetuate cultural appropriation in so many different ways. Just today, I had a chance to look at a number of, I was researching what was on YouTube, more recently on cultural appropriation. There's a ton of material, and my blood pressure was rising. I was sitting there going, just getting so excited and upset at the same time. Because after all, we're sitting in an institution. I don't know how old this institution is, but this institution, University of Utah Utes, for as long as I can remember, have been fighting about the name. And we haven't even touched the sports teams' names that continue to also cause this appropriation to perpetuate stereotypes in Native American societies. Earlier, everywhere I go, when people introduce me and they mention my bio is connected to so many different people. My history to this country is intricately tied to the landscape of America. When we talk about, when I'm introduced and people say, or when it's said that I'm the granddaughter of a Navajo code talker, what that means to me, when my grandfather couldn't even vote, when he was punished severely and violently in a boarding school, when they forced him to cut his hair. They forced him to not speak the Navajo language, a language that he was born with. All of these things, while we are only touching the teeny tiny surface, and I'm speaking about the fashion industry in particular, we could sit for a long time talking about Native Americans and the history and the contribution that they have made to this American society. That one question I continue to ask is, I wish that the American people loved Native Americans as much as they presume to love Native American culture.
Thank you, Yolanda Francisco Ness. And thank you to our panel members for sharing their experiences, their background, and expertise. Let's give them another round of applause. Really want to reiterate, right, that our primary commitment here is to learn from one another the information that's being shared. The intent is to not demean nor devalue an individual nor their experiences, or or if someone has a lack of experiences or exposure. Everyone here who is present, I believe you're here operating to do your very best. And with that being said, please continue to, our brother over here is going around with paper to jot down questions and thoughts you may have. The first question that comes is, have you noticed as a young person any challenges, any unique challenges you're facing in your personal, professional, and social life, as well as any educational barriers that your identity is experiencing?
Did you say young person?
That's what the person wrote here. And you're a young person as well.
Or women.
And before our panel members answer, is there someone who wanted to who wrote this down, who wanted to expand on that question?
Yeah, I'm curious, and the reason why I said young, is because, I'm old. I'm 58 years old now, and I have experienced a lot of what you guys are going through since I was little, since I was in boarding school, since I was in school. I've experienced marginalization and institutional in schools. I know what it feels like in the classroom. I know when you're told by a professor that your experiences can be dismissed easily. So I know what it is. So I'm just curious, has this changed? Have you seen any changes? As a young person, and this is the reason why I said young, is because I'm wondering if this how would I put it? This barrier is even harder to, climb the wall, because I feel like when I was here at school, I was just hanging on by my fingertips on the very edge of that wall, trying to get over to graduate, which was really, really hard. I'm just wondering if it's even changed. Have you at least gotten halfway over, or are you still trying to crawl that wall, or are you just barely hanging by the fingertips?
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I have something, a statement, I guess. I don't think much has changed. Honestly, from my own experience, my statement. So English is a second language for me, and I find that as I am trying to pursue a higher education through my undergraduate bachelor's work, currently my master, and hopefully the PhD, there is an erasure of local culture that's consistently happening in the classroom and outside the classroom. And when I say that is that I'm slowly losing my language to assimilate, because politically and academically, the institution, higher education, expects me to portray myself in a certain way to pass, to be accepted as a scholar, right? And I have this battle, this challenge inside of myself and with other colleagues who English is a second language too, that we consistently have to change the way that we write, we think, and we speak all the time to get an A, to pass. And when I go back home, like even I struggle speaking my own native language now because of the consistent assimilation that I've done so much in higher education. it's really interesting when, you know, cultural appropriation comes into play too, like how harmful and traumatic that is to me in my own experiences. So I feel like it hasn't much changed. I think it's institutionalized and systematic, and it's a barrier that I will probably continue to face as I'm trying to stay true to my own self and try to preserve my own culture and language, and at the same time wanting to be credible in an institution with that degree. That's what I'm facing right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There are quite a few questions here. Thank you for them. And so I want to get through as many as possible. And so there's another one here where the person states, my understanding that anything that is sacred or private is off limits. But does the line go further out than that? Is there a definitive line or situation by situation based on their own personal opinion? So the question is, where is the line between healthy celebration of other cultures and an offensive or problematic intrusion of another culture? So trying to find a balance, right? How many folks, as you all are thinking about that question, how many folks have ever done something where their intent and impact did not align exactly? I should see just about everyone's hand, right? So, you know, there's a fine line between intent and impact, and this question, I think, kind of gets to that as well, between a healthy celebration, right, and a problematic intrusion.
Yeah, when the whole sacred idea comes up, it's really based off the community that it's emulating. Like I had mentioned in my kind of speech thing, it's emulating because appropriation can be okay according to certain, and I'll give you an example, according to certain groups. For instance, I haven't seen it, but you know, moving to Utah, I've been in Utah for about less than 3 years. You know, you learn about the church and the religion, all these sacred things, and then I hear about this Broadway musical that kind of parodies the entire religion, and so I'm just like, wasn't that sacred? You know, like last week before the show was here, and it's kind of like, well, and that's why appropriation is problematic sometimes, because there are certain groups that will say, no, this is sacred, but it's sacred because it's tied to culture and history of thousands of years, compared to a sacred. Come on, guys. A sacred. I should have just called in. No, a sacred, something that's sacred that's only been around not as long, but that it's supposed to be held on the same level. And to me, there are different levels of sacredness, because, and the thing is, we have to do that, because if we don't, something that is invented yesterday or today is going to have the same weight as something that's been going on for thousands of years that has been suppressed. But now, you know, white people discovered it, and now it's amazing, and we want to make money off of it. So it's always moving. You know, but for instance, the people who are up here now, I'm pretty sure they're like, no, it's never okay for you to do this. But when I want to also bring in that other side where it's like, well, actually, some other communities say it's okay, but that's not this community, because we're basing our appropriation off of whiteness again. So we're basing it off of someone else's standards. So we have our standards here, and I think we're well, I'll stick to myself. I'm talking about culture and history and tradition. That is always sacred. It's not sometimes or the other, and that shouldn't be mixed with other things that are sometimes considered sacred and sometimes not. I hope that makes sense. Like I said, I ramble a lot in the evening, so hopefully it's good rambling.
I wanted to add with the Tongan culture, with sacredness, is that there's a source or origin of it. And so there's meaning, you know, again, as I mentioned, that the Pacific Islanders are storytelling people. These certain rituals, certain designs, whether we see in tourism or in fashion, have a meaning behind it. We welcome people to learn and to seek out the community, seek out respective teachers, people that are knowledgeable of this, that that they can learn. And then, we comment on culture. We have non-Tongans Sikh teachers, and we're given titles, we're given names, we're given even chiefly names out of respect because of their willingness to come and learn. And so often we see with appropriations that they don't seek the source, they don't educate themselves or respect that culture. I think that's one thing that is I value and I respect when people are willing to come and learn, seeking the source. Where there's, just like whether you're academic, you have to seek the source of your, as you pursue your education. And so that's what I see as an intrusion of culture is when you're not willing to learn and not seek out the communities that you're trying to emulate.
I think of my 95-year-old auntie and her sister who's 93 who live in Poughkeepsie, New York, and a lot of their ways of knowing is through oral history, right? It's through telling that story. And I'm a firm believer it is hard to hate someone whose story you know.
Yeah.
And so each one of you here, your participation, your presence, you have a story. And in hearing about the experiences here, as well as thinking about your own backgrounds, think of yourselves as that of a teacher and a learner, open to receiving something as well as something to give. Another question that comes, do the panelists have any ideas, insights, data, or possible causal reasons why exploitation and colonialism seems to come from disproportionately more people of European descent? I'll repeat the question. Do the panelists have any insights, data, or possible causal reasons why exploitation and colonialism seems to come from disproportionately more of those of European descent? And here's some preface and background to that, right? So they're aware of European exploitation of the Pacific Islands, the Native and North and South American continents, as well as the continent of Africa. And thank you for putting the continent of Africa versus the country. Can't tell you how many times people actually say that. Hashtag just shake my head. So, do you have any insights, data, or possible causal reason for why exploitation and colonialism seems to come from disproportionately more people of European descent?
So can I take that? Because Europe colonized the Americas. That's what happened. There's no, I think that when we talk again, when we have conversations about cultural appropriation, they're always going to link to conversations about racism. And when we have conversations about racism, they're always going to link to conversations about white supremacy. We can't just mess around the issue. The issue is racism. The issue is the exploitation of our culture via the fetishization of our people, of our bodies, of our textiles, of our artifacts, of our sacred ways, of our sacred sites. It's exploitation. So this is, of course, an issue of our colonization, but it's also an issue about racism. And it is very much, yes, a European descent issue. You can't pretend that white people haven't done things. And of course, it's not as wide that is. It's not as if data. It's something that we see. The data is there. The history books are wrong. We have oral stories. We have data. We are the data. We are the proof. The fact that this indigenous continent didn't get rid of all of its indigenous people, but via colonization, the way that it was meant to be, as written by colonizers that literally wrote in their own books, this is our objective. Our objective is to annihilate these people. Our objective is to kill all of these people. The fact that we are now alive here is magic. The fact that we are alive here is a work of art. And so then we are subjected to ongoing colonization via white supremacy. And that's the data. That's the proof. The proof is us. The proof is the survivors.
Can I expand on that?
Can you give your name, pronoun, please?
My pronoun?
Name.
My name is Carl Moore. I'm the chairperson of Pandos, and I'm glad that James is up there, but I'm like really like, I want to answer these things. Okay, so I want to kind of expand on what Ella said because I think it's really important because we can say white, we can say European, but we have to go back to the roots. Because where did their ideology, where did the theology come from? And it's all like Roman Catholicism. That's the root of it. It's the Roman Catholic thought. It's the Stoic thought mixed with Judaism, basically. You have these two concepts coming together, and then you have this Roman Catholicism that comes about. And Roman Catholicism, essentially what they're saying is, we know who God is. We know what the sacred is. Everything else is not sacred. This is the sacred. So when they have that power, and they have that power to say, well, what we're doing is we're going to give you the sacred. We're going to give you the sacred. We're going to tell you who God is, and none of your beliefs, none of your values, none of them are valuable. That's exactly what gives them, and that's what the European thought was. You know, we're going to save all these people. Like, for instance, I'm sorry that I was late. But save the Indian, kill the man. You know, that was the motto of the boarding schools, and the boarding schools are run by churches. And if any of you guys want to know, like, who I am, I'm Christian. I am Christian. I'm not Roman Catholic, but I am Christian, just so you know. But these boarding schools were set up by Christian churches. They basically were subbed out to Baptists, Mennonites, Lutherans, Methodists. All of these people, they were set there so that they could Christianize the Native American people. And that's what the root was. It was all Christianity. It was Christianity used in a terrible, horrible way. It was like slapping you in the face, saying, believe in Jesus. Killing you and saying, believe in Jesus. That is the problem. And that is the problem. And I hope you guys believe me. That is the root of the problem. It basically started in this Roman Catholic thought. And even if you're Protestant, even if you're not Roman Catholic, your mindset, I promise you, if you live in the United States of America, if you live in Utah, you have a Roman Catholic worldview. You look through the lens of Roman Catholicism. I promise. Sorry.
Thanks.
I believe you.
Okay, so I see several hands, and I got a lot of questions here. So,
it's short.
so is it in response to?
Yeah, it's just related to this.
And yours is in response.
I'm not able to ask a written question because I'm disabled, so I'm having kind of an issue with there being these written questions of people going first. I would really like to be able to ask my question. It is topical here.
Okay, so let's do this order so that we can keep things in decency and in order, right? With the integrity of what the program tonight was set up. So I saw your hand and I saw your hand here. Definitely want to acknowledge your presence and your questions and responses, and then we'll get back to these. All right.
I just think that question as a whole is kind of an illustration of how we have a very European-centric society. Because, as an Asian person, I'm Taiwanese, Chinese people have a 4,000-year history where they were colonizing other people and doing a lot of other stuff and appropriating other stuff. So just that question illustrates some basic problem with our history. But that was just my initial response. Yeah, it's cool to be upset, but our cultures were also there's a whole world of culture that isn't discussed at all in our history books, right? What Taiwan did to Vietnam, what Japan did to Taiwan, what China did to all of the rest of Asia, it's a way bigger dialogue than I think we have when we ask a question like that. Anyway, that was all.
No, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I think that, in 2 hours, no one is seeking to solve and resolve every historical wrong in history that has been happening, right? As it is intended to be able to bring out what wrongs have happened.
Right. And I don't want to call out that person asking the question. I just think it's important to think the world isn't about Europe, right? And it's not about all the atrocities that are carried out by one people. It's a lot of people hurting each other.
Thank you. And in your sharings, by the way, if you can make sure you use your name and pronouns so folks can know who you are in your sharing as well. So, name, pronoun?
Oh, Kim.
Kim?
She.
She. Okay, thank you. And then you have your hand up as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for your patience.
Katie, she. So, this is quite a personal question for me to ask, and it involves
Right now, it's so there's lots of information, lots of misinformation. Yeah, that'd be something for you, because I don't even know anything about that.
I mean, like, what makes you uncomfortable about it? Like, why are you posing these questions about it? Like, do you have any examples maybe of things that, hey, this, I don't know about this?
Like people who maybe get into this and they're not researching back, like you were kind of talking about, like honoring, like say if somebody wanted to follow a path that dealt in kind of Pacific Islander deity or something like that. I worry that people will just like decide, oh, this god seems cool, but not really think about like the tradition they might be utilizing in their practice or honoring it, that kind of thing. So like, and then I'm just questioning myself because there's like, if you're using a really ancient culture, there's only so much you know about it. So I like wonder, what does it need to do that? It's also a culture that has some problems being oppressive at times and that kind of thing. So I don't know. It seems complicated. But
I wanna take a shot at that.
Can you say your name, pronoun, please?
Sherry. I think I should stand up for this. It's a very good question, and I think it needs to be addressed because, for example, in Arizona and Sedona, they were having a sweat lodge, and this guy was having people pay to go to the sweat lodge and not knowing what he was doing. And when I say not knowing what he's doing, I mean that there's sacredness behind a sweat lodge. There's prayers behind a sweat lodge. There's thousands and thousands of years of teaching that is done, or knowledge that is incorporated for a sweat. So for somebody to come and appropriate that and ask for money and say, well, we're doing this for the people because I was taught to be a medicine man. I was taught to be a medicine woman. Not knowing anything about it, but just knowing how to start a fire, how to put the rocks in there, how to build a sweat house, put the rocks in there. It doesn't matter what order you go in, just pile in everybody, and we're gonna have a sweat. What happened? He fried them all, he cooked them, he baked them in there. You know, that's blasphemy. So so this is the warning. So if you think that you can go to say, oh, that's cool, you know, I'd like to learn about Buddhism. Yeah, I was in a monastery for a year. I know all about it, so come on, join me. I'll teach you. You know, it's just like that. Or, yeah, I was in Japan. I know how to do this. You know, and just taking something that you don't understand and say, that's cool. Let's do this. Like at Standing Rock. You had all these hippies going there and thinking that it was really cool that, you know, to walk around and play Indian or live out in the open for a few months and go back and want donations to help themselves, not the people. That's what it is. And that's not good. So, in order for you to bring this goodness to you, you shouldn't believe everybody that says they know.
You know, Ms. Sherry, that's a great segue into someone's question around who profits from cultural misappropriation purchases. You know, my culture is not a market or a trend, right? And one of the questions that folks would like to know is what you're doing and what you're wearing furthering the pain of the people that were part of the oppressed culture?
If I may tag on to that really quickly, there was also a question that was asked in the feed about somebody who had visited another country and got to know the locals and purchased a hat there. They're wanting to know, kind of in line with that, is wearing the hat disrespectful then to that culture? So kind of in line with that, I just want to call that out so that the viewers here, I'm hoping that will kind of lead into answering both of those questions.
Thank you. And what was your name again?
My name's Elijah.
Elijah. What pronouns you use?
Just male, or he, and technology chair for Pandos.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I just wanted to say something really fast. And again, I know my experiences are very different from other experiences. Everybody has different experiences. But personally, my experience as an undocumented indigenous person living in the so-called United States, it breaks my heart open to see people from my homeland, to see people wearing stuff from my homeland. It breaks my heart open to constantly see our sacred artifacts and our textiles being kept on frames. It breaks my heart open to even hear about vacations to Machu Picchu and to see pictures of people, selfies at our sacred sites. And as far as clothing, again, I understand that there are different experiences, but as someone who literally cannot travel back to their homeland, minus just basically deporting themselves, I can't. I can't. My family currently is undergoing a lot of trauma because of climate change and because Peru is actually flooded right now. And it's just so sickening, and it's so frustrating to see people that are so willing to wear our stuff but never willing to actually help us. They're so willing to dress up like us, but never willing to actually listen to our stories or to hear what those things even mean. And there's just this disassociation from culture, this I'm willing to be you, but only for you as what you look like, but never as who you are.
And I think that also, I appreciate that. I think that also relates to policy making. So when we look at this country and how the laws and policies were formed and how we continue to perpetuate this oppression through even modern policy by instituting, for instance, the Utah legislature saying that this is an English-only state. What does that do for the rest of those who don't speak the language? And laws are meant, I think, to be challenged and changed and revised and, amended and replaced to be relevant to modern times. And I have to agree that the stuff that I was mentioning earlier when I was looking online, doing a little bit of research this morning, the things that I saw online with groups of people who were non-native and dressed up in headdresses, it just pained me. It pained me to witness that we live in a society where, to a point, this is acceptable behavior. And the question that I had asked earlier about, I wish that the American people, instead of continuing to love the culture or the fashion, would think about how that impacts those of us who are native, who have a deeper understanding of what the headdress represents, what fashion represents. You know, the Halloween, especially the Halloween costume, you know, some of the things that they were Navajo designers. Go, if you want to purchase Native American fashion, true Native American fashion, there are Native American fashion designers who are creating fashion and designs that come from the heart, that come from the individual, the tribe, that have meaning. And, sorry, I should stop there. You have a lot of questions. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. All right. No, thank you. And this is a great conversation, and there's some questions around safe spaces, right? And I even would push that to say courageous spaces, right? Where individuals bring the wholeness of who they are to certain spaces, withholding nothing, and taking the risk to be there. Right? And so, although the ideas of safe spaces for oppressed groups have purpose, how is this reconciled with HIPAA, etc., and the secretive therapy for the oppressors who use safe space concepts to withhold information or not allow information to be challenged as a way to protect white supremacy? And another part to that question is, what laws need to be addressed in the state of Utah to make it a safe place to live?
That just seems like such a question for someone who's white. Tell me how it is that we can justify the action of white people. How? I mean, I can't articulate that. I can't find the right words to say, let me explain why we do that. I can't. It's just, maybe someone else can, but I can't.
May I respond to that?
Well, so what I want to be cautioned about, right, is the idea around safe space and who gets to define it and who doesn't, right? And who's targeted and impacted by it and who's not, right? And so I do see a hand here and a hand here. So my question to you all is, will your comments further the conversation?
I believe so.
Okay, great. Please state your name, program.
My name is Bear. Online, I'm barely noticeable, and I answer to whatever pronoun. In thinking about this concept, recently people being pulled out of mosques or the grandmother being exported with no assistance whatsoever, just dropped into a Mexican city. I've been thinking about this, and yeah, they want to make make sanctuary cities or safe places. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to create some laws. And if you know there are people in your community that aren't supposed to be there, let's come up with a way to make them welcome there. Let's make a law that says, okay, the student whose visa runs out and they have to fly back to Kenya so they can fly back here to finish their schooling, or the grandmother who has been here for 40 years, paying her taxes, being a law-abiding citizen, but she doesn't have the piece of paper. Let's get her the piece of paper. Let's make it to where we can make that happen. And of course, the powers that be want to focus on, but they're bad people. The bad people eventually end up in handcuffs, and you'll figure those guys out. But the rest of them are really trying to live their lives and make their community better. Let's create laws to where that can happen.
You know, Bear, and I see your hand over there. Thank you for your comments. And I just want to be cautioned and aware about who gets to belong and who doesn't, right? The language around that.
Yeah.
And so just being cognizant around who belongs and who doesn't and who the bad guys are and who are not, right? So, and there's policing that gets done around that often targets underrepresented and marginalized people. However, thank you for your contribution. Name, pronoun, and comment or question. If you could stand, please, so we can hear you.
My name is Victor, and I use the he and he pronouns.
Thank you.
And it's just like listening to all the stuff that people were talking about. And I just want to say, like, appropriation is violence. And it's violence in the way that it's portrayed and used. You know, and when we're talking about appropriation, we need to start talking about objectification, sexualization, hyper-masculinization, anti-blackness, anti-unity, orientalism. There is so much things to talk about. But in reality, it's like we're talking about safe spaces and appropriation. And appropriation is violence. And safe spaces are an ideal thing. But we live in a society like for our own identities, safe spaces are not there. You know, more about instead of talking about safe spaces, I like the idea of talking about more about accountable spaces. You know, everybody is accountable, you know, for their own actions, you know. And about appropriation, you know, appropriation is violence, you know, and people should be accountable for that. And I don't think it was so much the Roman Catholic Church. I know a Christian, I don't have any big admiration for like Christianity or organized religion, but I think it's like the whole Western thought as opposed to indigenous, you know, the whole worldview, the ideas of governance, the ideas of social interaction, the way that indigenous people view the land, the water, the culture, the mountains, you know, as a whole in general, as opposed to what Western thought teach, you know, separate ourselves from the land, make us different in the land. You know, Western thought told us that we're here to dominate the land. Indigenous thought told you that you're part of the land. So it's a whole way of life, see the world, and work completely different. That one whole clash, you know, and right now, you know, 500 something years after that, we're proud of that, and we're still arguing and discussing about that. But yeah, all the things that we're talking about is basically violence, you know. The fact that you said it before, you know, everybody loves native culture, but how many people really love native people? You know, everybody wants to be native, everybody wants to be Mexican for Cinco de Mayo, you know, but you want to live as a native person or as a Mexican person every single day of your life and see what they experience and what they're going through. That's a totally different thing. You can wear a kimono, you can wear feathers, but you're never going to live in my skin. And that's the difference. You know, appropriation is violence. I keep saying that, you know, every time I go, you know, I'm talking to people, you know, and that's a little bit of the problem.
Thank you.
Just because I feel like I was being addressed in that comment. Not only is appropriation violence, but also like laws will never stop appropriation. There's not going to be laws that will stop appropriation. Appropriation is a form of violence that is very much in our culture. It's a cultural form of violence, and the same institutional violence is the same institutional violence that decides who is the good immigrant that gets to belong here, who is the good person that gets to not be deported. I am the bad immigrant. I broke laws when I come here. There are literally laws that are telling you right now to be violent to me and to tell on me and to call eyes on me, and I just, laws will not stop cultural appropriation because laws will never stop violence, and that is my belief, at least in response to that question.
I just based on my experience in local government for 16 years, I never thought that we would have legal protections for the LGBTQIA questioning community ever in housing and employment. When my boss came to me and said, we're going to do this, it's first on the list of things we're going to do and accomplish over the next 4 years, I was flabbergasted. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But then when it happened, the beauty of this is that this social activism that happens on the ground organizations like Pandos and others is incredibly important because it can change laws. It can. And you not only especially for those of us who are privileged, who are English speakers, who were born in America, who may or may not have a degree, who graduated from college, we can be allies to those who live in fear every single day to change. We can change laws. If we do this, if we come to a common ground and see the injustice, it's possible.
With any privilege, I believe there's a responsibility. And before Butch closes us out in prayer, my question to you, in terms of what Victor said about accountable spaces, what is something you learned tonight? You know, what is something as a result of your presence and being here, as a result of your involvement and hearing the various questions, and we did not get to get through all of the questions. What is one thing that you've learned or are taking away from tonight before before Butch closes us out in prayer? Something you learned tonight. And let's hear from someone who may not have shared so far or heard their question. Okay, yes.
My name is Ed. I go by David.
I'm sorry, say your name one more time. Ez? Thank you.
So I wanted to just talk mostly about what we heard tonight. And some of that is that when we're bringing up these questions, and these questions are always in panels and discussions where it's like, why does this not make sense? Why are we going through this? And I think that comes from uncomfortability. And I want people to challenge that. And this position where we're trying to ask questions of, well, are you a bad person? Like, you're doing this. Like, is it okay
has been a pleasure serving as a moderator this evening. My name is Wazir Jefferson. I use he, him, his pronouns. Thank you to Pandos. Thank you to Miriam. Thank you to you all for your participation. Really appreciate this opportunity and blessing. Please don't let the conversation end here. Further it. Whether that's asking questions, whether that is being part of an organization or getting further involved. Don't let the conversation end here. Continue to make a difference and be the change you want to see in the world. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Blessings to you all. This is awesome. I'm encouraged by every single one of you being here. This is good stuff because education is how we improve our societies and improve just relationships, and we dispel, that naivety. Just really fast, I just want to say that when we're talking about sacred things and it's really important that we, like what our brother has said there, that we recognize where we're at. We're in Utah, we're in the United States of America, and this is Native American land. And when it comes to creating safe spaces or laws and stuff like that, I think it's interesting how we kind of conceptualize who does the laws? Who does this? And I want everyone here to understand that it's the people here that should be the ones that do everything. It's the people here that decide who comes in, who comes out. It's the people here that should be deciding all of the laws. I just want to make that clear that it's up to us, that it's our prerogative as Native Americans to decide everything, but we don't have that at this point. Anyways, I just want to introduce Butch Russell. Butch is awesome, and he's our spiritual advisor. And us here at Pandos, we really believe, because just like what I said, is that the Native American spirituality should be at the head of everything that we do. It's at the top. It's acknowledging the Creator in everything because of the location that we're in. Butch Russell grew up, he's Yavapai, Apache, and Chemehuevi, and he grew up being raised by a stepfather who was Lakota, who was in the A movement, he was there at the Longest Walk, he was there at Alcatraz, he was there in Washington, D.C. at the occupation of the federal building. Butch was there. And that A movement was a good thing because it revitalized our spirituality. And to kind of go back to one of the questions I heard was, is it better now than that, or is it better now or worse now? And it is better. I'm going to have to say it's better now. Because back then, a little while ago, it was our own people that were actually trying to get rid of our own language because we're embarrassed of it, because we're ashamed of it, because of the boarding school concepts. But now we're being educated, and we can kind of revitalize that, and our spirituality is coming back, and it's coming back in force. And I'm really privileged to say that it's happened. So this is Butch Russell, and he's going to be saying our prayer. So we'll stop videotaping.